How is it men crush women time and time again and go unpunished? Wow, right? That powerful, incredibly modern-sounding line actually comes directly from the 2018 BBC adaptation of a novel written over a century and a half ago. It's spoken by Marian Halcombe, a character who honestly feels like she could have stepped right out of a modern movement, yet she was born squarely in the Victorian era.
Welcome to today's Explainer. I am so excited to guide you through this one because we are looking at Wilkie Collins' absolute masterpiece, The Woman in White. This 1859 novel didn't just captivate Victorian society, it completely terrified it. It broke publishing records and basically laid the groundwork for the modern thrillers and detective stories we all love to binge today. So let's dive into this.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The sensation novel era. 2. A labyrinth of secrets. 3. The heroine with a mustache. 4. Feminist icon or patriarchal tool. And 5. The father of detective fiction. Section 1. The sensation novel era. Victorian thrillers. Let's set the scene in Great Britain, somewhere between the 1850s and 1890s. The Industrial Revolution had created this massively expanding reading public, and they were suddenly devouring a shocking new style of literature.
This era gave birth to what we call the sensation novel. And what made it so revolutionary was exactly how it combined romance and realism. You see, before this, Victorians just assumed that terrifying, sensational events only happened in Gothic castles or, faraway foreign lands. But sensation novelists, they brought the terror right into the comfortable, middle-class British living room. It strained both romance and realism to their absolute limits. These sensational stories dealt with heavily taboo subjects: adultery, bigamy, forgery, disguise, and insanity. Now, what's really fascinating about all of this is that these scandalous themes allowed authors to explore deep contemporary social anxieties. For example, in a time when Britain was ramping up its use of record-keeping, everyday people became completely terrified about the permanence of their own identities. It's actually incredibly similar to how data harvesting and identity theft worry us today.
Section 2. A labyrinth of secrets, The Woman in White. Let's jump right into the twists and turns of Collins's 1859 serialized sensation. Collins anchors his entire plot with two half-sisters who literally could not be more different. First, we have Laura Fairlie. She is pretty, fair, passive, and perfectly fits that Victorian angel-in-the-house ideal of submissive domesticity. Then we have Marian Halcombe. She is described as unattractive and dark, but she's remarkably active and brilliant. The absolutely crucial point here is that Collins flipped the traditional fairy tale dynamic on its head. Instead of the blonde, beautiful heroine saving the day, she's actually quite dense. It's the undesirable step-relative who proves to be the bright, active force driving the whole story. And they definitely need that active force because the plot they are trapped in is terrifying. Let's walk through this scheme. Laura is married off to the dastardly Sir Percival Glyde. Percival has a dark secret, and to keep it hidden, he commits a woman named Anne Catherick to a lunatic asylum. Now, Anne eerily resembles Laura and always wears white. When Anne escapes and eventually dies, Percival and his suave, villainous friend Count Fosco actually kidnap Laura, swap her identity with the dead Anne, and lock Laura in the asylum under Anne's name. Wild, right? It is up to the dogged Marian to uncover this entire scheme. And this plot of false imprisonment struck a massive nerve at the time. Historically, controlling husbands frequently committed their wives to asylums simply because they refused to remain silent or obedient. Section 3. The heroine with a mustache, Marian Halcombe. Let's focus our investigation on the absolute breakout star of the novel, the woman who completely co-opts the heroine position from her sister. Collins introduces Marian to the reader through the eyes of Walter Hartwright, an art tutor. Walter first sees Marian from behind. He immediately notes her perfect waist and gracefully shaped figure, naturally assuming that when she turns around, she is going to possess conventional, delicate beauty. But when she does turn around, Walter is completely startled. Collins writes, "The lady's complexion was almost swarthy, and the dark down on her upper lip was almost a mustache. She had a large, firm, masculine mouth and jaw." Collins specifically designed her to lack conventional feminine gentleness and pliability. He intentionally created this jarring twist, giving a remarkably brilliant woman distinctly masculine physical features. But it wasn't just her looks that defied convention. It was her sharp, defiant intellect. She fiercely critiques Victorian marriage, calling out the odious selfishness of mankind. Her bold intelligence and flat-out refusal to passively accept the patriarchal rules of her time made her an incredibly beloved character to readers, both then and now. Section 4. Feminist Icon, or Patriarchal Tool, the Academic Mystery. And this perfectly sets up the core question we really need to answer today. Was Wilkie Collins actually challenging gender roles, or was he strictly reinforcing them? So, was Wilkie Collins a feminist? For decades, literary critics enthusiastically praised Collins for exposing the hypocrisies of Victorian bourgeois respectability. They argued that he used his fiction to genuinely advocate for women. The modern prevailing viewpoint, which has been supported by critics really since the 1970s, is that Collins is a proto-feminist. Scholars argue he exposed the unjust social constraints placed on women, showed rare sympathy for the fallen woman, and deliberately destabilized the traditional gender binary. By placing transgressive characters like Marian inside the female Gothic genre, the argument goes that he was spotlighting the intense victimization of women in a highly patriarchal society. But let's look at the other side of the coin. There is a fascinating DialNet paper by scholar Belaine Fernandez Crespo that takes a completely different stance. This paper argues that Collins's rhetoric of protest is actually entirely fraudulent. According to this academic counter-argument, Collins doesn't empower women at all. He checkmates them. The paper points out that despite Marian's bold talk, she is ultimately debarred from saving the day. In the end, it's the male hero, Walter, who has to step in, rescue Laura, and restore order. Furthermore, the paper argues that Marian's masculine ugliness was designed specifically as a deterrent to female readers, basically warning them not to emulate her independence unless they wanted to end up as repellent spinsters. By the end of the novel, the once rebellious Marian is tamed into a submissive domestic role, acting simply as an angel in the house for Walter and Laura's child. In this view, Collins uses Marian to teach female readers that resignation and submission are their only true alternatives. Section 5. The Father of Detective Fiction. Collins' Legacy. Let's zoom back out for a second to examine the massive legacy of Wilkie Collins and how he shaped the media we consume today. Tracing this timeline, after The Woman in White essentially invented the sensation thriller, Collins published The Moonstone in 1868. T.S. Eliot actually called that the first, longest, and best of modern English detective novels. Collins laid the ground rules for the entire police procedural genre. His influence stretches all the way to modern neo-Victorian thrillers. Acclaimed authors like Sarah Waters with Fingersmith and Eleanor Catton with The Luminaries directly cite the sensation novel genre, with all its forged documents, secret marriages, and dark identities as their core inspiration. But honestly, perhaps the most sensational story of all was Collins's own life. Despite writing endless pages critiquing the institution of marriage and strict social norms, Collins lives a deeply unconventional double life. He split his time between two different women, Caroline Graves, whom he lived with for most of his life, and Martha Rudd, with whom he actually had 3 children under an assumed name. And he managed all of this while battling a massive, lifelong addiction to laudanum to treat his gout. Which leaves us with this final, provocative paradox to ponder. How did a man who criticized marriage and lived so wildly unconventionally write a novel that ultimately traps its most brilliant, rebellious heroine into a life of domestic submission? Is The Woman in White a feminist battle cry, or just a cautionary tale designed to keep women in their place? I highly encourage you to pick up the source material, read it, and weigh the evidence for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the narratives you read.